welcome to another episode of Lifting Lowdown, the bi-weekly podcast brought to you by Lift and Hoist International. My name is Guy Harris and I am the publisher of LHI, the magazine servicing the global industrial lifting sector. On this programme, I invite people from the industry in joining me to cut through the formality and discuss topics in a relaxed and friendly manner. I'm joined yet again by my regular cohort Richard Howes. As listeners will know, he is a director at Bridger Howes, a PR consultancy with a client base in the lifting and material handling sectors. Rich entered the lifting industry in 2005 as a journalist and edited numerous lifting titles before transitioning to business ownership in 2014. Also joining us is Kat Moss. Kat started work at Catena Inspection and Engineering Services in 2010, then filling an admin role as one-week holiday cover. After being offered a permanent job, she works there to this day. Kat says after that initial week she discovered an industry she never knew existed, and this is primarily why she wants to make others aware of it and ensure it gets the recognition it deserves. She knows her mission will be complete when she is able to select lifting industry in the sector drop-down column in online forms. After attending a Lifting Equipment Engineers Association technical meeting for the first time back in 2014, Kat went on to be elected as a board director in 2016. Welcome to Lifting Lowdown, guys.
Hi.
Good to be back again, Guy. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining me again, Rich, and thank you for joining me, Kat. Really appreciate it. As regular listeners will know, this podcast does not hold fast to the format of a straightforward interview, but invites industry representatives and thought leaders to openly discuss key topics. In our last episode, we talked about how people tend to find themselves working in the lifting sector, namely drifting into the industry by chance or via the more direct route of family association and connections. However, there are also trade schools and in some cases scholarship programs available for skilled trades, although these do not tend to have a direct overlap with our industry. In recognition of this, the Lifting Equipment Engineers Association has supported its membership in launching the employer-led Trailblazer Apprenticeship Scheme in association with its Military Transition Scheme and Think Lifting School Engagement Programme last year. And it is pathways such as these that we'll be covering in this episode of Lifting Lowdown. So Kat, as I said, I'm really happy that you can join us on today's podcast. You're a real torchbearer for attracting young people into our industry. And of course, we'll cover that over the next 30 minutes or so. But your entry into the lifting industry is an interesting one and arguably quite typical one too. Can you explain to our listeners how you came to find yourself working in this sector?
I can. I came through an agency to work for a company that worked in the lifting equipment sector. I was doing a one-week holiday cover. I never visualised doing any more than that. I just needed a bit of a job because I'd been in a business that had closed down. I came for a week and I'm still here now, and that was 10 years ago.
Okay. So
luckily not still on the agency books.
No, but I mean, a baptism of fire or?
Definitely. I'd worked in sort of male-dominated engineering type industries before, but that was more fabrication. So not, even though it's kind of linked to lifting, didn't enter my head that lifting was a separate industry on its own.
Okay. And now, of course, you have a senior role at LEEA.
I do, yes. I'm Vice Chair of the association.
Introduction to yourself, Kat, and one that, as Guy said, is very typical of so many of us. And I think we discussed before on these podcasts, there kind of be two pathways into this industry at the moment that you come across. One, you kind of follow a family member into it, or two, you're here by accident and a stopgap, or the kind of the short-term thing that you're talking about becomes a bit of a job for life. So very passionate about expanding on those pathways into the industry. And to that end, I think it would be interesting for our listeners to hear a little bit more specifically about the Trailblazers Apprenticeship Scheme and how you think that might help open more avenues to our world.
Yeah, when I initially sort of approached LEEA to become a director on the board, one of my in the end, the application for it, one of the things I said was that I was keen to see an apprenticeship route for the industry. At the time, under different management, if you like, that wasn't really an option, and we were told it wasn't possible because it wasn't able to be rolled out globally. A change of direction within LEEA meant that it was able to be re-established again, and we asked the question again. So LEEA kindly sort of made the initial links with the Institute for Apprenticeships and set up a meeting that was held at LiftX a couple of years ago, and just sort of said to anybody, any employers who were interested, to just come along. So that's where I found myself in a back room at LiftX, listening to a lady talk about apprenticeship schemes. So one of those sort of things you really don't think about what's involved in it. You sort of, people go to college, they pick an apprenticeship scheme and this, that and the other. But the actual, the art of getting a new one out there is very, very difficult. So initially we sort of got together, got a group of people who were willing. You had to have a minimum of 10. So we met that criteria. The group asked me to chair the meetings, and I accepted. Didn't really understand what that was going to mean for the next 2 years, but again, here we are. And then we just sort of outlined the draft of what the apprenticeship would look like. So the initial hurdle being to prove that there wasn't already an apprenticeship similar that could deliver. Working in the industry, I was reasonably confident that that was correct. The only way we've been able to get anybody new into this industry is to just train them on the job. We've looked at apprenticeship schemes that are out there. It's primarily fabrication, manufacture, that kind of thing. People don't understand how much of a niche market lifting equipment is. It's not making things particularly. So yeah, we started moving forward with that. We wrote the draft, that was accepted. We got the endpoint assessment scheme, that was accepted. So if you look now on the website for the apprenticeship scheme, it shows there as virtually able to deliver. Our main stopping point at the moment is getting quotes in from people able to deliver it.
Okay.
Again, notoriously a difficult thing to do. COVID-19's made that little bit more difficult.
Sure. Okay. So, I mean, just to clear that up, where is the association at with its members in terms of rolling out Trailblazer? I mean, is it active now, or are you still a few months down the line? What's your best guess?
We're still a few months down the line, but in terms of what the Trailblazer group can do, we've done everything we can. That standard is written, the endpoint assessment plan is written, the endpoint assessment is quoted and deliverable. It's the delivery from colleges that's the part where they're sort of stopping. The Institute has recognised there's issues with this. They have actually gone out to people that haven't got approval as yet on these and asked them where they need help. So we've gone back and told them where we need help. I think they've even reduced it. It's typically 3 quotes and they'll assess it. They've even reduced it to, if you can get 1 quote, we'll assess it. But like I say, at the moment, education's a bit on its head.
Okay. And what's the take up been with your membership? I mean, they fully embrace this, right?
Yeah, very positive comments. I think it's one of those things that everybody wanted, but nobody really knew how to do anything about it. So I think, we've not had anybody turn around and say, why are you doing this? This is a waste of time. When we initially wrote the draft, we had to circulate it to so many people because, again, just to prevent anybody coming back with comments saying, well, you've not done this, that and the other. So we circulated that to the membership, and again, the only comments that came back were positive and along the lines of, why has it taken so long to get to this? So,
right, okay. I can see Rich is, I think he's chomping at the bit to come in with a question.
Yeah, I've certainly got questions, guys. But I think what's encouraging about this is that it's being driven by people with a passion for it, and moreover, it's giving them an actual vehicle by which to make some tangible progress with it. I've spent years dealing with very passionate lifting industry professionals. They've been very inwardly facing, and they've not been very good at kind of getting that across to anyone, let alone young people, school leavers, people who really who have the future of this industry in their hands. And I think what's exciting about this is that the word apprenticeship means something
Yeah.
to young people. They know what that is. And I think that's an important, the terminology is very important here. I mean, we've been talking for years about things like STEM, haven't we? And you look at a lot of young people's faces when you say that, and they wince a little bit. And because I think to them, they know it starts with science and it ends with maths. And as a father of a 16-year-old who's just kind of had the whole GCSE turmoil and things like that, I kind of I've got first-hand impression of kind of the way that STEM is introduced to young people, and the way that industries like ours have gone about trying to introduce themselves in schools. And I listened to a podcast that we did a while back, listened to it back, and I was probably guilty of being a little bit negative about the whole thing, but I'm not necessarily apologetic about that, because I stand by my comments. I kind of, Talia has something at her school and it's, oh, we've got STEM day, or we've got someone coming in to talk about this. And I asked how it went and what was said, and I just think, Struth, that there's no way they've incentivized you guys to look that up or Google that and go into that line of work. Now, these aren't specifically lifting equipment companies, but I think at least the apprenticeship, and through the things like the Trailblazers scheme, at least we can kind of maybe give proper kind of momentum and passion to these introductions to our sector. And I don't want to go off on too many tangents to just cut in, but just to add a bolt on another point about the way these guys are educated, is there's very little bridge from education, engineering, science, maths to how it actually happens in the real industry. When they look at forces, they look at two magnets on a workbench.
Yeah.
Look at how that, the bit what is, and by the way, this is how it's important, exciting, interesting, and this is how people are making careers out of it. It's just, this is what the magnets do.
Sure.
Force, it does this, and I just think clearly, and I don't know the education system inside out, but my point's valid because I'll get reports back from someone who's just come through 5 years of secondary school education, and I speak to a friend, so I have an angle on it, and it just, I don't think we can rely on schools and education to kind of put these people in our laps. We've really got to go out and grab them.
I agree with you, and I think something that I took from that was the transference of what you're learning into skills. And I guess what we're talking about, and through the apprenticeships or apprenticeships in general, is learning in-demand skills for in-demand jobs. Would you agree with that, Kat?
Yeah, I think sort of going back to Richard's point about education, the first years of education are based on play. We don't sit them down, we don't teach them maths, and then we sit down and we say, right, we're going to teach you these subjects individually. Well, STEM actually is a subject on its own, effectively, isn't it? And if you taught it and was introduced to it in that way, if you sit to it and tell a kid that they've got to work out an angle of a triangle, that is so boring. If you were to talk to them about the inclusive angles on a lifting assembly that's using to lift, so it's talking about different parts of STEM, that might mean more to them. Going back to my own experience of maths, I learned nothing at school when it came to maths. Being a barmaid, that was when I learned how to add up. You had to add it up in your head. You had to do it as you were going along because you had to be quick. So real world introduction to education is everything that's needed. So, and again, looking at LEEA's Think Lifting, let's get into school and let's show them things that are relevant to the industry and make them feel passionate the way that we do.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Think Lifting, and we've mentioned Think Lifting in previous podcasts, and that's something that I'm very passionate about, and it's very much a hand-in-glove approach, isn't it? I mean, that's where we're trying to cultivate interest in our industry or in engineering per se, and drive some interest towards our industry, I guess, get people thinking about what is the lifting sector, what does it do, where is it prevalent, and quite honestly, it's everywhere, and that's something that the film or the films that we've produced with LEEA have answered very well, I think, and made it very current. So you've written in LHI, in fact, about moulding apprenticeships for the industry, Kat. Can you give us a bit more detail on that? What does that mean? What does that entail?
Yeah, sort of going back to what I said initially, the apprenticeship schemes that are out there, even for basic fabrication, are kind of they're trying to make a one size fits all. And for lifting, that really doesn't work. And even if you look at lifting as an industry, some people might veer more towards manufacture of lifting equipment. Some people might steer towards the inspection of. You don't necessarily need to know both comprehensively. So again, even within the industry, there's those different pathways off. And I've forgotten the question now.
Well, no, we're just talking about moulding apprenticeships for, let me come at it from a different angle. I mean, are there particular roles in the lifting sector? I mean, you're at the coalface. You know, not only do you work for an inspection company, lifting inspection company, but you're vice chair of LEEA. So you're very much at the coalface. You speak to people all of the time. Are you getting regular feedback from your colleagues, from clients about there's a direct lack of techs, for example, inspectors of lifting equipment, and that's what's hugely important, what with Lola and everything. So are there specific areas in our industry where there's a real experience drain and we're about to run flat? And if that's the case, is LEEA and the apprenticeship scheme deliberately going out and targeting specific areas because we know we are soon going to run out of talent?
Yeah, basic lifting equipment inspection. If you look across the industry, the majority of the inspectors are approaching retirement age. When you bring in someone new into the industry and you want to educate them and train them up, you can send them to do a LEEA course, which is fine and will cover, you know, the basics of lifting equipment. It doesn't teach them the life skills, so you need that extra bit to bolt on to that. So when you've got sort of a whole group of kids that now have to be in education till they're 18 anyway, what's the point in them doing something that doesn't really relate to the industry for those 2 years of education, then trying to get a job and learn on the job and build that up? Let's get them training from 16, learning the relevant skills about lifting equipment. And not even lifting equipment, some of it is just life skills, and that's, you know, for me, that's where an apprenticeship comes in. As an employer teaching someone, I can send them on external training courses. Internally, someone can show them how to inspect something. They can't teach them how to interact with the customer. If they've already learned how to interact, it's hard to undo those things that they already know in terms of social skills and just those general interactions and working in a real world business environment.
Okay. I mean, Rich, one for you. I mean, you've already mentioned, of course, that you and Ross Maloney were talking about your daughters, or in your case, your stepdaughter, and having quite a bad experience of these sort of engineering induction days through school and stuff. I mean, with your stepdaughter, for example, I mean, do you think that engineering or the lifting industry is something she would ever consider?
Yeah, good question. Slightly loaded to make it specifically relevant to Talia, who's kind of got her own sort of, her own ideas. Science, maths, kind of technology is not necessarily something that I would say is a forte of hers. She might answer that differently, but I think because I've spoken so positively about the industry and I've explained, a lot about it, and she understands, she's seen pictures over my desk for years and things like that. And it's just those little seeds, isn't it, that you plant with people. So what I would say is she knows what it is, and she knows it's a very varied career path, and she knows that I'm not an engineer, and yet I make a living in the sector. And there's other people who've got those very positive, passionate kind of leads into the industry. There are people who stumble across it because for that reason, it just goes back to what we've been talking about. It's that vehicle, isn't it? of getting it in front of these people so they can actually see this as something they want to aspire to. So absolutely, I mean, Talia understands that there's, you know, very varied careers in this industry, but that's largely because of me telling her. It's not me or the industry necessarily having a platform to put that to a wider audience that's gonna change the world. I mean, see, you mentioned kind of, I think, you know, Ross and I were, you know, comparing notes, sadly quite grim notes, about the way that our industry and industries are presented to these kids. And look, I don't want to get too sidetracked on schools and education, because it's a difficult job. It's a tough job, and I respect anyone who wants to go and, you know, inspire young people. That's different class as far as I'm concerned. But they just don't seem to have the capacity or bandwidth to do anything. I mean, the irony is that these kind of STEM days and talks and presentations, and Talia went to an all-girls school, so they had a lot of young women come in to try and motivate them and inspire them to talk about where they were plying their trade. But the irony is the school treats it as something like a fire drill, and it's kind of like, you know, right, okay, we're going to have to cut the assembly short today, or we're going to have to finish, you know, drama early because we got someone coming in. So there's an apology for it straight away.
Yeah.
Which is that's just so frustrating when you think of how important it is. And then all it becomes is at the end of September that they do this thing, and the next person's coming in end of January, girls, they're going to talk to you about this, but it's just forgotten about. There's no cohesion, there's no tie to the education, then someone else comes in, and again, there's a little bit of an apology of why we're doing it. The teachers roll their eyes because it erodes into their teaching time, that they're judged on their grades for their subject. And, you know, what when the history teachers hauled in front of Ofsted or the governors, they're judging him or her on the grades in history, not the preparation of these young women to go and change the world or join industries. And that's a very difficult thing to try and factor into the education system. I get it, but it just infuriates me how I remember sitting there listening to Miss Risby trying to teach me science, and she used to sit there reading out of a book, and I got absolutely nothing from it. I was put off anything to do with science straight from the word go. It was just mind-boggling, meaningless equations, and, you know, it was stuff on paper, like Kat was saying about, in its very simplest form, mathematics. And, you know, I know plenty of guys who love engines, and all of a sudden they start looking their way around and say, oh, that's like trigonometry, or that bit's like, I remember doing that at school. But
absolutely,
no one ever says this is important because, or this is how this goes down in the real world. And it's 2020. And it's still exactly the same.
But that's the benefit of learning on the job, isn't it? I mean, and that's what apprenticeships are all about as well. I mean, you're going to retain some of that information that you maybe just started to lose or conveniently forget being taught at school. But if you go into some kind of apprenticeship scheme soon after you leave school and learn on the job, then you're earning some money, but you're earning a trade. And something that we've said before, I think we said in the last podcast, in fact, you know, this is an industry or a job for life. And that's what you're trying to achieve with your members with this apprenticeship scheme, isn't it, Kat?
That's right. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I think that's so important. And to answer your previous question slightly differently, Guy, you know, Talia would have 100% consider an apprenticeship and that avenue into work, which is really the important thing societally about this, if not kind of for our wheelhouse. But it's when you're planning your magazine, Guy and Kat, when you're rolling out a new inspection program or putting the importance of LOLA periodic inspections to people, we're all considering the audience. And that's the bit that I think where the apprenticeship and the Trailblazers thing gives us that opportunity, because in all the way that I see young people typically addressed at school and by industries that go in, they don't pitch their information and they don't sell it to the audience of the day. It's impossible for them to relate to it. And I think that's so simple, is how can we make our industry and how can industries generally package things up in a way that 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds actually can relate to it.
Well, could it, sorry to jump in there, Rich, but could it be as easy and simple and, dare I say it, desperate, given the current climate, what with COVID-19, that people are going to need jobs? Maybe they're going to find themselves in a career that they hadn't necessarily considered in the first place, but they come to find an industry such as lifting. They realise that they can earn money, that it is an interesting profession. It can take you all over the world. And one of my bugbears, it's not so much going to university. I mean, I commend the university approach. I absolutely do. But I know so many people that have come out of university and they haven't gone on to use those skills or that 1-1, that 2-2 degree or whatever, in whatever they found themselves doing for the last 20 or 30 years. And to top it all, these days you come out with a mountain of debt. You're saddled with debt that you pay half your adult life paying off. You know, if you can go straight into a job, then you can start saving for a house or a car or whatever comes first. So that's what we're trying to do with apprenticeship schemes. And do we think now that they are more relevant than they ever have been?
Definitely. I think, you know, I relate to that university comment. Personally, I left school, went straight to college and did graphic design. Finished that course one day, started a job the next day in graphic design. A lot of people that went to college with me went on to university, came out, but because of the industry, you had to have studio experience to get any money anyway. So they started where I'd started 2 years previously, having come out of university and with a degree. And here I am 20 plus years later, not using that education at all. So, you know, I'm very much a believer in university. And this may sound awful, universities for people that want to be doctors and vets that you genuinely need a university university qualification for. Nothing about that would appeal to me to come out with a mountain of debt, because I think of the nature of the person I am. Everything I've done, I've usually learned on the job and learned as I've gone along. Even if you go and, you know, even a doctor, they'll go to university and learn that, but they still have to learn on the job. They still have to learn, you know, bedside manner and things like that a university can't teach them. So no matter what career you pick, education is not going to be the full answer for how to get ahead in that industry. You know, we see it not even just inspectors, but even hiring sales guys. I don't mean on the road sales guys, just people in the office to be able to sell lifting equipment. And again, they need that certain level of understanding of the equipment. And, you know, an apprenticeship doesn't necessarily have to lead to an a hands-on job at the end of it. If you understand that industry, you could go down the design route, you can go down the sales route, you can, you know, there's so many pathways there. Yeah, it's I don't want to talk all day about it, but I genuinely could, I think.
But I understand, and it's myriad, and we all get that. I mean, as something that Richard said before, you know, we're kind of preaching to the choir. I mean, I should acknowledge the fact that you are the first lady we have spoken to on Lifting Lowdown. So thank you for joining us, Kat. But there's no getting around it. You're a woman in what has been perceived a man's industry. I mean, you've even written about this sort of this perception of an old boys network with secret handshakes. I mean, is that changing now, and how so, and what can we do? So it's a double question. How can we bring more women and minority groups into our sector?
It is a tricky one, and I sort of almost I get embarrassed when someone says that to me, because I genuinely believe it shouldn't be about gender or any of that. It should be about skills and people. And I know that's easy for me to say, because I'm the minority in this situation that you're asking me that about. But you know, I've had people email me. A fellow board director emailed me and said, "I've answered in this way about something. As a woman, does that sound okay, or does it sound like I'm being condescending to women?" And I feel, you know, I think that's an awful situation where guys have suddenly got to start checking what they're saying because they feel like they might be like that. But then I appreciate that if we don't get to that point, then the people that don't think like that will never change. So the guys that think like that and worry about what they're saying and how it might be perceived aren't the ones you've got to target, are they? They're the ones that are already thinking in the correct way about minorities and women. I'm not going to say women are minorities, not by a long shot.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it is. Any engineering company is going to be predominantly male-led. I don't know why that is. I guess it's a hands-on scenario. You know, maybe women are more scared to want to be in that kind of environment, and maybe it's parenting and school and everything that just puts people into that category. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, when I joined the board for LEEA, there were two other ladies that aren't on the board anymore through various reasons. I am the only female board member. But again, that's not through lack of, you know, it's genuinely open to everybody.
Yeah.
But I guess the percentage of women in this industry is very low. So, you know, A, low, and B, they're wanting to be more involved as well. So, but then on the other hand, if you look at the LiftX awards from last year, I think there were quite a few high profile awards that did go to not only ladies, but young ladies. I think Ella Cheetham,
Yes.
you know, is a particular example. It's, you know, so that's really inspiring to see.
Just so in case our readers don't know, Ella is, I think, 21 years old, and she runs 2 lifting companies.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
really quite.
I aspire to be her.
Well, I think we all do, quite frankly. But we're coming close to calling it. Unfortunately, I feel that we could go on for a lot longer. But Rich, have you got anything you want to sort of surmise or end with on this?
You've hit the nail on the head there, Guy. This is a conversation that could run and with good reason, and we can go off on really valid and make lots of valid points. I mean, just quickly, just to add to what Kat was saying there, you know, living with Talia and her mum Laura, it is interesting with the whole kind of feminism thing and different industries, and both of them are exactly the same as Kat there, and they're like, well, this isn't about me being a woman. I don't want any. Why are you asking me that as a woman? And they're very passionate about feminism stopping with equality.
Yeah.
And not being anything more than that. So just an interesting bolt onto that. And just in closing, just really excited to see where this Trailblazers thing can go. I think that these young people, particularly young women, yes, I'm biased, but Talia and her mates are, you know, they're fantastic young people. They're just a microcosm of society, but they get so much bad press and they're absolutely ridiculed. But I saw a headline, and today, you're trying to avoid them, of course, but a headline today was saying, oh, by the way, our young people are responsible for spreading the second wave of coronavirus. And I'm just like, what they've all been through, particularly, you know, years 11 and 13 and people at university and exam age people. I'm really, the people who are holding it together at the moment of that age, who've had their exams torn from them, their first opportunity to put something down on paper taken from them, and are still positive about their future, and engaged in these processes. We want them on these apprenticeship schemes, we want them in our companies, and we want them in our industry.
Absolutely, Rich, and I couldn't agree more. I do think young people get a very raw deal these days, and Generation Z's facing a particularly difficult stage of their lives, and it's only just beginning, of course. Very quickly, if you wouldn't mind, Kat, if there are any aspiring lifting professionals listening to this and they wish to explore apprenticeships, how should they go about it? In a minute, if you wouldn't mind.
They can go to the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, I think it is, IFATE website, and all apprenticeships are listed on there and the status, so even if they're being written. Ours is on there specifically, but does say it's not being delivered as yet. But yeah, if they go on there and they keep an eye on that, they'll be able to see when it is deliverable. It doesn't matter what time of year it becomes available. It's not like a school education where you need to wait for September to start. It can be started at any time in the year because you can just pick up the education part when you need to.
Okay, look, fantastic. We've only just touched the surface of this, but look, I really do thank you both for joining me on Lifting Lowdown. Go well, be safe, and maybe even we'll circle back and do this another day. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
As ever, big thanks to Rich for joining me again, and a huge thanks to Kat for coming on to explain the Trailblazer Apprenticeship Scheme for us. Our industry certainly requires this alternative route and introduction into our sector. Off mic, we were all agreed how passionate we are about this subject, and hopefully this came across a little in the programme, although we hardly scratched the surface and didn't have time to discuss some of LEEA's other initiatives. I would like to wish LEEA and its members every success with the apprenticeship scheme, and I'm sure we will return to this theme once they are up and running and taking hold. Possibly we can get a first-hand account from an apprentice when we do. Thank you for listening, and feel free to leave comments or fire over questions if you have any. Your feedback and suggestions of future episodes will enable us to make this podcast even more relevant and interesting. We'd love to hear from you. You can keep up to date with the latest industry news by visiting LHI's website, liftandhoist.com. Thanks for listening, and look out for the next episode in a couple of weeks. Until then, stay safe.